Chess kids, there are a lot of reasons to go to Vienna. It's the home of Mozart. There's great pastries. And there's a gambit. Wait a second. I think I'm not going to advocate for the gambit, but 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Today, we're going to look at the Vienna Gambit. I'm just not going to tell you to play the Vienna Gambit. But before we get into all this Viennoiserie stuff, go ahead and hit that subscribe button just in case I don't know, eat some more food on my show. Now, the Vienna Gambit is when white does not play knight f3 here, but instead plays the move knight c3. Now, technically, it's not the Vienna Gambit until white's next move, but what I'm going to advise you to do when your opponent plays knight c3 is to play knight f6 and put a little bit of pressure on this pawn. Now, white could just play a move like knight f3 and sort of, transpose back into the 4 knights, and if you're an e45 player, hopefully you know what to do in the 4 knights. White could also play this interesting move bishop c4, and now, chess kids, you have to really know what you're doing to play knight takes. Although I'm a big fan of the fork trick, because this knight has not come out to the square f3, you have to know what to do in case of this incredibly weird move, queen h5, threatening mate, of course. And the problem is, if you guard with your queen, then when your knight is captured, you cannot play the move d5 because there's no protection of your pawn, so you're not going to be able to get your piece back. Now, luckily in this position, you can play the move knight to d6, but when the bishop saves itself and you develop to defend your extra pawn, then white can do a little remove the guard deflection tactic. Uh-oh, now if you ever take this knight, or if this knight takes you, either one, you're going to get checkmated. Again, black is okay, but you have to really know what you're doing. So, let's go all the way back to this position. If you do not want to study chess for 100 hours, you could just play bishop c5, which is totally normal and fine, and probably my recommendation. I did play this once in a tournament game, and I did live to tell the tale, but I was pretty scared for the first, 3 hours of the game. But today, the main meat and potatoes, the main Wiener Schnitzel of our discussion is going to be the Vienna Gambit, which is pawn f4. And anybody who's watched my videos before knows that I'm not really going to tell you to play an opening where you move your f-pawn so early. You are opening up your king. Now, can I say it's a bad opening? Of course not. In fact, some of the most creative chess players of our time have played this move. Richard Rapport, Fedor Jobova, Daniil Dubov. You may not know these names, but these are some of the most creative chess players around. What's the difference, though, between them doing it and you doing it? Well, they are all 2700 and you're not. I'm sorry, but you're not. And if you are 2700 and you're watching my videos, give me a call. I'd love to give you a personal thank you. Okay. Now, this is actually a tricky position because the next move is not so obvious. The next move for black, the best move, and the only move I can recommend, luckily, was taught to me by my coach when I was growing up, and now I'm going to teach you. We actually insert an attack with an attack. I do not like taking this because you completely give up control of the center. And then after pawn to e5, the best move is actually knight back to g8. So, not going to recommend you take. What I am going to recommend you do is play d5, counterattack in the center of the board. That is a really hard move to find on your own, but luckily, you're a ChessKid YouTube subscriber, which is why you're learning it here. Okay, now white can do a couple of things in this position. Let's say that white plays pawn takes pawn. There's a couple of moves here. You probably can take this pawn back, but again, you're losing control of the center of the board. I kind of like the variations where black pushes. And yeah, you're going to be down a pawn for a little while. However, white's development is actually pretty tricky because this knight cannot go to its favorite square, no happy square. And if your bishop gets to c5, it's going to be really hard for white to get the king out of the middle. Not to mention the fact, this pawn is not exactly safe. It's not like that pawn is going to be kept on the board for a long time. Here's what could happen. One of white's most common moves is pawn to d3 because this pawn on e4 is such a pest. And after pawn to d3, I'm not really sure I would take because you're sort of helping, white develop with a move like bishop takes. But what you could do is play bishop to b4, pinning this knight, and oh, by the way, getting ready to castle, which is really key because you can see the e-file is about to open up, and you're going to want your rook to be spying that white king. And if white plays the most natural move, which is bishop to d2, you've got a couple of things you could do. I think castles is probably totally fine, but there's an even spicier move. You could play e3 just to gain time. Now, of course, white has to take, and then here you can castle, and even though you're down 2 pawns, this rook is coming here, this knight is pinned. Obviously, when your knight takes, it's going to come with tempo. You're going to pressure this guy, and the pinned knight, and this guy. Queen h4 is an idea, and in practice, black actually does pretty well in this position. So we'll just stop here and say that black gets good play. Let's go back though to the position where I taught you to play the move d5 as a counter attack to the Vienna Gambit. White has another main line. Instead of taking this pawn and allowing you to push, white can take this pawn. Now here we are going to get our pawn back right away. We're going to play knight takes pawn. Now I don't think white's going to take your knight because your pawn again is a pest when it gets on e4. It keeps this knight out of its happy square. So the most common move is knight f3 because after all, queen h4 check, if you haven't seen that trick before, it was coming. Let's just give white some kind of other move. Let's say white plays, I don't know, d4. That would be really bad because, for example, queen to h4, and if you play g3, I can chop that pawn off the chessboard. And of course, if you take, your rook is hanging. Okay, now white can try and move like knight f3 or something, but I mostly want you to just understand this tactical pattern. So we're going to go back to this position because in practice, white pretty much always plays knight f3 to stop that queen from coming to h4. And now in this position, again, there's actually a lot of options. You could just play c5 and bring your knight behind the pawn. I actually think that black has a ready-made plan, which is to go after this pawn on e4, because after all, this knight can attack it very easily. We know this rook is going to land on e8, and the purpose of c5 is so when your knight does go to c6, if this pawn goes to d4 to support this pawn, you can chop it off the board. There's an even spicier way of playing. I'm not saying it's better, but you could do it. Some pros like to play the move bishop to c5. Obviously, there's very bad things happening on f2. Knight f2 is a strong fork. So when white plays d4, then we play bishop to b4. We sort of trick white into pushing the pawn. Now this knight is double attacked, it's in a pin, and black can play the move c5, knight c6 on the next two moves to strike at the center. Anyway, that is an alternate option. So those are the main ways to get pretty good play against the Vienna Gambit. I find that the hardest thing to remember is that third move. Let's review. After f4, what are we going to play? d5, that's right. We just played the move d5 here. And if takes, we push our pawn. And if takes, we play knight takes. And either way, black gets a pretty reasonable game. Now, if you are a lover of the Vienna Gambit, I know I've been pretty one-sided, but I don't think it's a good idea to pick an opening where you move your f-pawn so early. If you are 2700 though, you do you.